Hello and welcome back to another video. I'm Aaron from Road Ahead Mobile Way, and today we're at Adelaide RV and we're going to go through talking about the difference in ball weight depending on the level of the van. So the reason why this is important is because if you've got a car that can only take, say, 300 kilos on the ball, depending on the level of the actual hitch itself, when you hook up, that can actually vary the ball weight by anywhere up to 30, 40 kilos in some instances. And today we're going to go through a single axle like we have here, the Territory, and then we're also going to go through a dual axle just to see the difference and roughly what percentages they change depending on the level of the tow ball. So what we've done is I've actually gone through and I've leveled the van. So how I did that, there's two ways to do it. You can either use the level on the drawbar, or I've actually taken a measurement from up in the chassis here, and then I've taken one from a bit further up, roughly there, and we've used the jockey wheel to get that level, and then also just confirmed it with the actual bubble spirit level. So before we even did that though, we just quickly checked the compliance plate. So a lot of confusion with compliance plates happens. All right, so the two figures we're looking for are the ball loading at tear, which was 218 kilos. And then we've got another figure in here. Not every caravan's the same with the compliance plate, but this one in particular has a maximum permissible ball load of 350 kilos. We actually weighed this one, empty tanks at tear, and what was the ball weight?
It came in at 212.
So it's pretty accurate. So that is the weight of the ball with nothing in the van, no water, just the jack, and that is it.
All right, since then we've filled the tanks up, we have made sure everything's level, and it is now sitting at 250.
So as we said previously, all that has happened with this van is we've just filled the water tanks. So as you can see, the two tanks are located in forward of the axle, and they've actually added that weight to the ball from level. That's without any equipment. So you can see how easy it is for that ball weight to go up and why it's important to get the ball weight and the ball level so then that weight doesn't shift. All right, so now what we're gonna do is a little experiment, and we're actually gonna drop the ball weight right down and we're gonna lift it and see what the difference is. Now, it may not be a lot, but when we're talking about a car that has a max of say 300 kilos or 350 tow ball, if you're at 330 as it's level and then it's nose down, that might increase you over that 350 mark. And that could have implications with towing, the way it tows, or vice versa. If the tow ball's high, that could push weight rearwards and make the van sway. So getting the van level is, especially on a single axle, is vitally important to making sure you get a smooth ride, it's safe and it's comfortable. All right, so what we've done this time is we actually, as you can see, we've jacked it up a fair bit. We're over exaggerating what actually happens, but it gives you a good idea of what can happen if you lift the front of the van too high. So the weight wants to shift rearwards. So what does that do to the ball weight?
So at the moment it's made it 14 kilos lighter. So it's sitting at 236 instead of 250.
So why this is important also is because with a light tow ball, it can actually push the weight rearwards of the van and make the van want to wag its tail a bit. And if you find that you're getting a lot of sway in your van, a lot of the time it is due to just your ball weight being too light. And having your van not level also doesn't help with that situation either.
So if customers are complaining of the caravan swaying, the first thing we'll look at is the tow ball, what percentage that's sitting at and how light it is. So if the tow ball is quite light, that can cause sway, and that can be easily rectified.
Another thing we do look at as well is if you're taking weight off the tow ball, the weight isn't disappearing, so it goes somewhere. All the time it will come to the axle. And what that can do is that can actually push you over your axle limits by just shifting that weight if you're really heavy and overloaded or loaded, fully loaded. All right, so next what we're gonna do is we're actually gonna drop the tow ball from the center line or the level. We're gonna drop it 170 mil. That is an extreme case, but if we're talking about, say, the standard Ranger, for instance, this ute, they will sag a bit. So you've got to take the sag into consideration, and that can also bring the van down. So getting it level, once again, is very important. So we're gonna go through that in a minute. We're gonna drop it and see what happens to the ball weight. All right, so this time what we've done is we've actually dropped the van from that level down 170 millimeters. This is probably the extreme end of it, of how low it will actually go, but It just gives you a good idea what happens with the ball weight if it is nose down a little bit. Hayley?
It's now sitting at 270, so it's 20 kilos heavier than when it was level.
It is better to have a heavier ball weight, but what this can actually do is throw your ball weight over what your max limit is. Like I said, if you were sitting at say 330 with this caravan on your ball and you had it level, and if you happen to, if it wasn't level and the front was down, that's actually going to take you up to over that 350 mark, which you're then now getting into the limits of your car. What can actually happen by having an excessively heavy tow ball, that's actually going to throw weight over your axle, and then your axle becomes overloaded, and then you're putting more strain on your gear. So what happens these days, just due to the way that caravans are manufactured, as you can see, they're a lot higher than what they used to be, but generally cars themselves haven't really gone up a lot. So a lot of the time people just have their standard Ranger, for instance, and the tow ball height will be X amount, and then they'll just hook the van straight up onto the car without checking the heights, and that's what gives you that nose down. And it can also make it tow horrible as well. It gives you the opposite effect. Okay, cool. So we've done the single axle, and like we said, we've exacerbated a lot of the height. So we've gone up 170 mil from level, and we've gone down 170 mil. Now yours might be different, but it just gives you an idea as if you don't have that level, what actually happens. So your tow ball gets lighter the higher you go, and heavier the lower you go.
So now we're going to have a play with the tandem axle and see what it does with those weights.
All right, cool. So this time what we're going to do, we're going to go through the dual axle. So obviously another leader expedition. We've got the scale set up on the axles as well as the tow ball scale. So what we're going to do is test out what happens if we drop the tow ball, lower it, what happens to the front axle, what happens to the rear axle, where does that weight shift? So for this example, we've got the rear axle is weighing in at 1,423 kilos, and we've got this front axle is weighing in at 1,357. And then up the front, Hayley?
The tow ball's sitting at 222 kilos. This caravan is not fully loaded because the water tanks aren't full. So just take into account that that will change as well if the water tanks are full. And next we're going to lower the tow ball, and we're going to see how that affects the axles, the front and rear.
All right, cool. So what we've done this time is we've actually lowered the tow ball by 120 millimeters. And it's actually interesting what's happened. So the rear axle now weighs 1,271 kilos, but the front axle's actually gone up and is now 1,526 kilos. And what's happened with the ball weight?
And the ball weight's dropped by 17 kilos. It's now sitting at 205, before it was sitting at 222.
So what's actually happened is it's done the opposite to what the single axle's done. So by putting the nose down on this caravan, we've actually decreased the ball weight. You wouldn't think that would happen, but the reason why it's happened is because now this axle is going to start taking that load, and this axle's starting to lift almost off the ground. So the weight through here is a lot less, and the weight's pushed forwards. So next we're actually going to test, and we're going to lift the front of the van and then see what happens from there. This time what we've done is we've actually lifted the front of the van by about 85 millimeters. Doesn't seem like a lot, but it's done the opposite effect again to the single axle. So now our rear axle weighs in at 1,542 kilos. Our front axle only weighs 1,227 now. And Hayley, what is the ball weight?
The ball weight is now 235, so that's actually gone up 15 kilos.
All right, so what's happening in this instance, because we're lifting the front of the van, we're actually putting less strain on this front axle, and we're pushing the weight rearwards. So weight, without actually moving inside the van, weight will still shift. So if you lift it, the weight wants to go backwards. If you drop it, the weight wants to go forwards. But what happens on a dual axle caravan, different to a single axle, is that the axles actually want to take over for you and help out with some of that load. So on this one, as you can see, we've lifted it. So now the rear axle wants to take over the load because the weight's pulling rearwards, and vice versa. If we drop the front axle wants to take over, but then what that does is actually reduces your ball weight. So on a dual axle, the ball weight fluctuations aren't as big as what they would be on a single axle, but it's still important to get the van level, because that's going to give you the best ride, and you're going to get the axle limits about the same, which means that it tows nice and steady for you. All right, so today what we've gone through is the difference in ball weight depending on the level or the height of the ball. So on a single axle caravan, like we expected, if you drop the height of the toe ball, that's actually going to increase your ball weight, and vice versa if you lift it. So getting it level is pretty important, especially on a single axle. On the dual axle, surprisingly, it's actually done the opposite. So with a dual axle, if the ball is lower, the height is lower, it actually decreases your ball weight. But what happens, the weight obviously doesn't disappear, so it actually ends up going to your axles, and most likely your front axle if you're low, and if you're high, it goes to your rear axle.
So the best thing you should do is get weighed and work out where the weight distributes on your van so you can tow comfortably and safely.
You could have the exact same setup as your next door neighbour and you'll have completely different weights, and your car and caravan will tow differently just depending on your situation and scenario. So yep, vitally important you do get weighed, and you just look into it a little bit because it can make the difference between a good trip and a bad trip.
So if you like this video, make sure you check out our previous video on weight distribution, and also we'll be making more videos in the future with Adelaide RV. So if you have any suggestions and something you don't understand, write a comment below, and yeah, we'll do what we can.